mythology is subjective truth of a people communicated through stories, symbols, and rituals. They are not parables in the sense a parable gives you a moral ending or tells you is instructive. It tries to tell you what you are supposed to do. Mythology helps you see the world in a particular way and gives meaning to your life and to your existence. Um, that's what mythology does. So every culture, modern or pre-modern or post-modern, secular or religious, it doesn't matter. Every culture, a tribe to the most sophisticated societies in the world, have stories, symbols, and rituals that define them, frame them, shape their worldview of and give meaning to their lives. So these stories are called mythologies. And when you tell children stories, you are helping them make sense of the world, make sense of life. If you tell them only Greek stories, they will make sense of life in a particular way. If you tell them only Chinese stories, they'll look at the world in a particular way. If you tell them Indian stories, they will look at life in a particular way. I think in a plural society, we have to tell them all stories, and so that they appreciate how different people look at the world differently. The Greek gods uh, constantly sought to achieve. There was always a goalpost. This concept doesn't exist in Indian mythology. There's no concept of a goalpost. You're going round and round and round in circles, and you can step out of it and go step in it. You can't really control your life. There is a whole many forces at work. Um, it's a different worldview. So if you read Abrahamic mythology, you hear of stories of evil and the devil, a concept which doesn't exist in Hindu mythology, Jain mythology, Buddhist mythology, which are based on karma, where rebirth plays a very important role. So there's no concept of devil. So yes, if you want to help people understand the Indian worldview, you have to tell them stories. So these are illustrations of my book Shikhandi and other queer tales that they never tell you. Um, yeah, this is a compilation of queer stories from Hindu mythology, and it is placed in the context of queer stories from all the world's mythologies. So the idea is to tell people who pick up the book that queer themes are part of all mythologies, and they have a unique way of expressing themselves in Indian mythology. And this book compiles about 30 odd stories from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Puranas, and presented to the audience. And each of these stories has an illustration done by me, and that's what is part of the exhibit. So to get a visual, sense of these stories, what does it mean to be queer in South Asia? See, when today we use words like LGBT and lesbian, gay, transgender, the assumption is that it's kind of a homogeneous expression across the world. Um, it is important to appreciate that different cultures express queer ideas very differently. How it is expressed in China is different from the way it's expressed in India. The way it's expressed in Indian stories is very different from the way it was expressed in Greek stories. Um, and that difference is important to appreciate. For example, when you read Greek mythology, Zeus, abducts Ganymedes. So it's a very man-boy kind of relationship that is continuously spoken of. There are stories of Athena and her companions. Now, similar stories are not found in Hindu mythology. In Hindu mythology, you'll find stories mostly of transgender transformation, male to female transformation, female to male transformation. Gender is fluid, sexuality is fluid. Greek mythologies, Mesopotamian mythology, Zoroastrian mythology speak of one life, and therefore you are born, you live a life, and you die. Indian mythology speaks of rebirth, and therefore sexuality has to be seen in the context of rebirth, and that changes the way you approach the subject. And I think the idea of this exhibition is for people to appreciate the diversity and the plurality even within queer ideas. That it's not one way of looking at the world. And different periods of history are seen it differently. I notice in America, people are relatively more comfortable with gays and lesbians, but not so much with transgender issues. But in India, people are far more comfortable with transgender than with male and gays and lesbians. Perhaps because of just exposure. You have seen or been familiar with the transgender people, mostly male to female. They are known as the hijras in India, but they are marginalized, not that they are accepted or they're mainstream. So these are new ideas, but they express themselves differently. I think that's important to put sexuality in a cultural context, and that's, I think, the purpose of this exhibit. Well, it's a complex idea. Indian society was comfortable with sensuality, but within a structure, a family structure, a socio-political structure, a caste structure, a village structure. A modern society doesn't respect these structures. It speaks of the state. So the modern state is an extension of the colonial period, and it is the British who created the law in India, which is a mix of what they decided is Hindu law, which is Manusmriti. William Jones did it in the 19th century. What was called the Recollections of Manu became the laws of Manu. A simple transformation of word turned it into some kind of a commandment. And British laws were also brought in, and together the Indian Penal Code was created, and this was accepted by the when the independence took place in the post-colonial period. It was just accepted without thinking, because nobody had thought about sexuality to this extent. At that time, political freedom was far more important. Nobody thought of gender-based gender was thought of, so women got, but transgender was not thought of. Sexuality was definitely not considered important. It all started in the 60s, 70s across the world, where people started talking about gender, sexuality, fluidity, queerness. And suddenly India has now to locate and understand where does this belong, because the law is an old archaic law, which is for the first time you're looking at it and questioning it. So in the rest of the world, in Europe and America, people have looked at it, they've come up with their decisions, things have moved in a particular direction. I think India has to catch up. So it has to look at its past, it has to look at its law, and it is catching up, and I think um, it is moving in the right direction. It will take time, but it will go in the direction of, I think, modernity, and adapt itself in an Indian way. So it will not be a copy paste of what happens in the rest of the world, but it will have its own way of handling it. But it will handle it.